Masechet Gittin, Daf Lamed Chet. On the previous daf, we saw the case of a slave, as Eved Kanani, who is captured and then redeemed. And the question is, does he remain a slave or does he become free? So this depends on a couple of factors. One is that the person who pays the ransom, is he paying it in order for the person to remain a slave or in order to go free? According to Tanakama, it makes a difference. If he's paying the ransom for the slave to go free, then the captive does go free. According to the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, is Mahmir and says no matter what, they remain a slave, even if the redeemer has in mind that they should go free. So that's the one thing it depends on. Then we also saw machloket between Abai and Rava that bring up the question of Yeush. Did the original owner have Yeush and said, I'm never going to get him back anyway, and so then he gives up hope, relinquishes hope, and so therefore that makes it hefker? Or is this before Yeush, and so since he still thinks he's going to get the slave back, so he retains ownership? All right, so we saw all those factors, and now we're going to compare it to a similar case of a slave, someone's Eved Kanani, who is sent to prison and he escapes from prison. So this kind of parallel, being captured by pirates and then being redeemed, is similar to being incarcerated and running away from prison. So we'll try to see if it's the same. אמר רב שמן בר אבא אמר רבי יוחנן עבד שברח מבית האסורים יצא לחירות ולא עוד אלא שכופין את רבו וכותב לו גר שחרור. So Rabbi Yochanan has a ruling that an Eved Kanani that is goes to jail and then runs away from jail, he has acquired his freedom, his physical freedom, and not only that, as monetary freedom, that is. And not only that, we even go and force the master, the original master, to write a bill of divorce. So this is two stages. There's actually two parts of slavery. One is a monetary part, that the owner owns the slave monetarily, and the other part is of an Eved Kanani has to do with the prohibition for that slave to, let's say, marry a full Jew. An Eved Kanani cannot marry a full Jew; they can only have yichud and have children with another shivcha Kanaanit. And so there's that prohibition and status part. And so for that, he has to give a get shichrur so that the servant is not only free monetarily, but also will have the status of a full Jew for all other halachot. All right, that was the statement of Rabbi Yochanan, which is lenient. Now, Tenan, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, ben kach o ben kach yishta'abed. V'amar Rabba bar Hana, amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol makom sheshana Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel b'mishatenu, halacha kemoto chutz me'arev v'saidan ur'aya acharona. But this is a problem because in our Mishnah it says that according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he is stringent and says no matter what the Redeemer has in mind, whether to redeem the person as a slave or as a free person, they remain a slave. And so it should be the same thing for a runaway, someone who runs away from prison should remain a slave. Now, if you'll tell me, but that's only the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, well, actually, Rabbi Yochanan said, anytime in the Mishnah quotes Rabban Shimon Gamliel, halacha follows him, except for three cases. Some case of a guarantor, a case happened in Saidan that we're going to see later on in the Masechet on Daf 74, and the case of someone who brings evidence after judgment has already been rendered. Okay, but this is not one of those three cases, so those are not relevant for us now. And therefore, this case, according to Rabbi Yochanan, should follow Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. If here Rabbi Yochanan says that we follow Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, then that would mean that just like a slave who is redeemed remains a slave, so too a slave that was incarcerated and ran away should remain a slave. And that contradicts what Rabbi Yochanan says here, that he gains his freedom. So how are we going to address this contradiction? So it's no problem according to Abaye, because he established the case of the Mishnah, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion, is before Yeush. The original owner still does not despair and says, I'm going to get the slave back, and therefore retains ownership of him. And that's why Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel in the Mishnah says that it doesn't matter what the redeemer had in mind, this person is still a slave. It was before Yeush. Whereas the case of the halachic ruling here of the a slave who's incarcerated and runs away, that's talking about after Yeush. That this is a case where the owner said, "Oh, he went to jail. Forget about it. I'm never going to see him again. I'm not going to get him back again." And that's why if he runs away, he gains his freedom. So for Abaye, it's easy to explain the contradiction. But according to Rava, who says the Mishnah itself is talking about after Yeush, and even though the original owner despaired of ever getting his slave back, even so, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that he remains a slave. So that there's no way out, because this is lachad Yeush, and even after Yeush, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says he remains a slave. And Rabbi Yochanan, and the second statement said halacha is like Rashbag. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say in the case of prison, doesn't matter if it's before Yeush or certainly all the more so after Yeush? How could he say? If after Yeush, all the more so before Yeush, how could he say that the slave goes free? How is Rava going to explain the contradiction? Amar lach Rava, Tama mai mishum de Chizkiya, borech shanehashta liktala masa nafshe, apule apil nafshe legaisot. Oh, so Rava, he explained in the Mishnah what was the reason for Rashbag being stringent and saying even after Yeush, because of what Chizkiya said. Chizkiya said that we don't want to encourage slaves to go and give themselves up to foreign troops so that they can gain their freedom, because they can go ahead and do that, and they'll take their risk of being in foreign troops. The foreign troops usually don't want the guy anyway. They're going to want to ransom him, and then the owner will have Yeush, and he'll be ransomed, and then he'll go free. And so we don't want to encourage slaves to go put themselves in that situation. First of all, it's dangerous. Second of all, then the community has to raise money for it, and so various reasons we don't want that. And that's why Rabban Gamaliel made it like a takana. This Mishnah didn't say mipnei tikkun haolam, but this is this is what would be the tikkun haolam. So to make sure people don't do that. Now, we'll only have to worry about that in the case of a slave who is in fact captured. But our case, the one that Rabbi Yochanan was talking about, of someone who was in prison and escaped, well, now he is risking death. If someone escapes prison and they're caught, they'll be put to death for that. So if he is willing to risk death to run away from prison, then certainly he's not going to throw himself into captivity with foreign troops. This is the kind of person who'd rather die than be captive, or at least risk death than be captive. So we don't have to worry in this case about him going and putting himself in that situation, and that's why it's consistent. Rabbi Yochanan says we don't, if someone gets captured, then we don't want people to follow that precedent, and that's why he says, okay, you know what? If you get yourself captured, you're going to remain a slave. But if you ran away, I mean, it's clearly you don't want to be captured, so then there's no reason to worry that a person will put himself into prison. If he runs away, then he does in fact gain his freedom. All right, good. Now we're going to have a couple of stories, very interesting stories. So the maidservant, this is a shivcha Kanaanit of Mor Shemuel, she was taken captive. And some people came, they raised money, and they redeemed her. And they gave her back to Mor Shemuel. Says, here is your servant back, and she can remain a servant. And they explained to him their legal reasoning. Listen, we ourselves, we follow the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. He's a dat yachid, but we saw just now, it's not so unusual. Rabbi Yochanan follows Rashbag. So as we follow Rashbag, that says that she remains a slave. Then therefore, it's within our right to return her to you as a slave, and you should have your slave back. But you, if you follow Rabbanan, then you can still keep her as a slave, because we're letting you know that when we redeemed her, we had in mind we would redeem her as a maidservant, and so she remained a maidservant no matter what. whether you follow Rashbag or Rabbanan. Good. Ve'in hu sebur lifnei yeush hava. Now, in this conversation that these redeemers said, they were assuming that Moshe Shemuel did not have yeush yet, so he kept hold of his claim. Velohi lachad yeush hava. But in fact, in truth, Moshe Shemuel already had yeush. And therefore, Shemuel not only did he not keep her as a maidservant, he also did not even require this Amma to have a get, because he reasoned, since I had Yeush, so now that's like, she's like hefker, anyone who can she gains her own freedom. And because she gains her own monetary freedom there, and then she was redeemed, so she has full freedom and doesn't even need to get cherut. At that point, she's a free Jewish woman, and she goes ahead and lives a full Jewish life. So you see, according to Shemuel, that he would not need. Such a case would not need a get shichrur. Shemuel tamed amar Shemuel lamafkir abdo yasa lechirut v'no sarich get shichrur. Shneimar v'chol ebed ish miknat kasef. Ebed ish v'lo ebed isha ela ebed sheyesh lo reshut lerabo alav karui ebed shen en lo reshut lerabo alav en karui ebed. And Shemuel follows his own opinion, because Shemuel also said that someone who makes his slave hefker, mafkir. So that's it. Hefker, he has no ownership over the slave anymore, so the slave gains his freedom. And not only that, also will not require get shichrur. That's it. The slave becomes full Jew for all things. If it's a Jewish man, can marry a Jewish woman. If it's a shivcha Kanaanit, then she gets free and she can marry a Jewish man. How do we know this? Because a pasuk says, "Chol eved ish miknat kesef." Every slave of a person. Now, what do you mean every slave of a person? The context is has to get Brit Milah and then can eat Korban Pesach. But this is sounds like it's like a weird phrase. Just say Vechol Eved. What do you mean Eved Ish, an Eved of a person? Does it come to mean a slave of a man, but not the slave that belongs to a woman? Women can own slaves also. It would be the same law. So that can't be what the word Ish is teaching. Rather, Eved whose master has ownership over him is called an Eved. But if there's a master who does not have ownership over the slave, then he's not called a slave anymore. And therefore, if a master says, you are hefker, this slave is hefker, not my property anymore, then they gain their monetary freedom, and together with that, also automatically gain their legal freedom for all things according to Shemuel. So we already saw an opinion beforehand that said she would require a get as well. Right over here, this was opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, said that they gained their monetary freedom and would require a get. So see that Rabbi Yochanan does require a get even though there's monetary freedom, but Shemuel says once there's monetary freedom, then you don't even need a get shichrur anymore. Okay, good. So that was one story. Now another story. Amete to the Abba bar Zutra. Ishtebai. So the maidservant Evet Shifcha Kanaanit of Rabbi Abba bar Zutra was taken captive. Pedakahu Tarmoda'a Leshumi Teta. But then a certain non-Jew from Talmud bought her, redeemed her, as to be his own wife. And so now this is a problem because she's already a Shivcha Kanaanit. A Shivcha Kanaanit can't go back to being a non-Jew. It's already a Shivcha Kanaanit or Evet Kanaani. Once they become a slave, they're already, it's like halfway towards being Jewish. They already have to keep many of the mitzvot and cannot just go and marry this non-Jew. So this is a bit of a problem. Shalchu le. So the rabbi sent a message to the Bi'abba, and they said, if you want to do the right thing, send your former ama, send her a get shichrur. Okay, now how will that help? Because she's still going to remain with this Talmud who's going to marry her under Talmudian law. So hechidame, what was the case? Idem asum parkila. If the Jews have funds and they would be able to redeem her, then lama ligita decheruta. Why do you have to send her a get shichrur? Just redeem her, and then how is this advice helpful? You could redeem her, and then you decide redeem her as a slave, redeem her not as a slave. Yeush, they'll fit into the case we had before. What need is there to send her a get shichrur? And if they don't have the funds available to redeem this ama from this Talmudian, then by sending her a get shichrur, how does that help her? Right? She's not actually in a way it makes it worse, because by being an ama ivriya who is freed, then she becomes a full Jewish woman. That's even worse, that she's going to be married to this non-Jewish man. So who did you help by doing that? And the answer is, maybe they actually do. They really do have the funds. So by sending her a get shichrur, then they actually will get together and collect the funds and redeem her. Because by human psychology, people are more willing to give money to free a free person than to free an Eved or an Amma, right? We saw that before, that, right, the opinion that just like there's a mitzvah to free a slave, so a free person, so too you should receive pay money to redeem a slave. But not everybody was thinking that way. And so it was harder to raise funds. So the funds were available, but they couldn't raise them. So here's the advice to the Bi Abba. You know what? Send a get shichrur, and then they're going to say there's a free woman who is enslaved, who was captured and then redeemed by a non-Jew, and is going to marry this non-Jew. That will get people to donate money, and so yes, it will help redeem her. The other option to explain this story is that, in fact, there were no funds available. The Jewish community was not going to be able to, no matter what, raise enough funds. But here's how this will help. By sending her a get shichrur, that will publicize the fact that this person was a shivcha, and now this Talmudian, who's probably wealthy because he went and redeemed this woman, and he is about to marry her, and thinking in his own mind, he thought he redeemed a free woman, a high-class person, and now that he gets a get shichrur in the mail, it turns out, the person I redeemed had been a slave, even though she's free now. She comes from being a slave. And shivcha kenanit, and so then he will be mizazel, he'll be disrespected. So, you know what? I don't really want to marry. I thought I was marrying a fine, free Jewish woman. Now I see, even though at this point she's already freed, and now she is legally a fully Jewish woman, but in terms of class status, he's not going to want to marry her anymore. And then, you know what, he'll allow her to be redeemed for a lower price, and then they'll pay that price. Okay, good. So one way or the other. Hold on, we challenge that. Really, would a non-Jew not want to marry her because she was not a full Jew? There's a statement that says, the animals of Jews are more beloved to the non-Jews than their own wives. Okay, I'm not sure what the background of this is. I mean, there are people today that that want to marry a Jew, or like to have a Jewish accountant, or for our Judeophiles for various things. But I'm not sure about their animals. Anyway, the point is that wouldn't a non-Jew want to marry a Jewish maid, even if she's just a maidservant, would prefer that over their own ethnic wives? And we answer yes, that's true. In private, if you ask them privately, right, what would you rather? Your own Tadmorian wife, or someone who's a Jew but of a servant class? And in private, they would say that we would rather anything that is part of the Jewish people. We'd rather, but in public, they wouldn't want that to be publicized. And so once you send, they get shichrur, that will be publicized, and then they're not going to want to marry her anymore, and then they'll sell her for a cheap price. All right, good. Now another story. So there was a slave woman in Pumbedita. By the way, Professor Menachem Kahana, who wrote an entire commentary on this Perek, a very important commentary, points out, interestingly, that almost all the sages in this whole sugya are from Pumbedita. In other words, this is a Pumbedita section. Okay, so Dehavuka me'abede ba'inashe isura, and so the people were taking advantage of her. Maidservant, unfortunately, could be taken advantage of because she doesn't have much of a protector, right? When as a minor girl, her father protects her. When she gets married, her husband protects her to make sure nobody will violate her. But you have this amma, and people are taking advantage. Amar Abaye, ilav da amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel, kol meshachrer avdo, over ba'aseh hava kayefna le mare v'chatib la gita decheruta. So Abaye says, if not, had it not been that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shemuel, that you're not allowed to free a slave. If you free a shifcha kananit or eved ivri, one violates a naseh, because it says leolam bahem ta'avodu. You have to take them as slaves. And simple reading, which should be Shmuel's reading, is that you can take them as slaves, right? But he's going to read it as you must take them as slaves and not free them. So, if not that he said that, I would have forced the master to free her, because as a slave, she's being taken advantage of. If she would become free, and then she would be able to marry a full Jew, and then she would be protected. And so I would do that if not for Shemuel. This is a very difficult, morally a difficult statement, right? That because of this pro-slavery statement, so now you're going to leave her in the situation where she is being violated. So it's like, double negative here. So for that reason, Ravina disagrees. Amar kiha modeh Rav Yehuda mishum mileta de'isura. So Ravina says no. Even Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shemuel, who does say yes, you should keep people as slaves and not allowed to free them. Even if you want to say that, in this case where a prohibition is being involved, people are violating her, this is a problem. So of course he would say in this case that you can free her. So that's a disagreement between Abaye and Ravina. Now we ask, Abaye mishum isura la. Abaye, wouldn't you agree with this? People are violating this serious prohibition with her. You are not going to agree that better to let her go free, so she can get married and be protected from this? Ha'amar Rav Chanina bar Rav Katina amar Rabbi Yitzchak, מעשה באישה אחת שחסיה שפחה ושחסיה בת חורין וכפו את רבה ועשה בת חורין. Right? Don't you know that other case of a woman who was half slave and half free? How could it be that? That means that she was owned by two people and as a slave, and one of the owners freed her. So now she's half free and half a slave. Okay, the only thing worse than being a slave is being a half a slave, because at least a slave, they can have yichud with another slave and have children. But someone who's half cannot marry a free Jew and cannot marry another shivcha. And so she also was being taken advantage of. And the Rabbi and Rabbah, the rabbis forced the master, Rabbah means the master here, and made her free. So aren't you supposed to let her go free? Added and explained that people were treating her like nothing, treating her like hefker, like there's no, she's ownerless. Anyone can come and do what they have their will with her. So that was very bad, and they let her free. So Abaye, don't you agree that you not are allowed and should let someone make a slave free? This is a half slave. Same thing with the regular full slave, that you should make them free so that we don't have this problem. And we answer, Hachi hashta, hold on, the cases are different. Hatam lala eved chazia v'lala ben chorin chazia hachef shadam yached la avde umin tarla. No, in fact, that case of half a slave, half a free person was worse, because she cannot be with an eved because she's half free. She cannot be with a free person because she's half eved. And so So that's why people were really having their way with her. She was totally unprotected, and they had to free the other half. But here, they could do yichud. There's no official marriage for slaves, but they could do yichud, assign her to this man, Eved, this shivcha to this Eved, and then that Eved will guard her and make sure that no one messes with her. And so you could do that, and that option is available. You don't have to free her so that she can marry a free Jew who will protect her. She can have this yichud with a slave, and that will be sufficient. So there, you know what, there is a way to protect her. That's why Abaye said, ruled as he did, that you cannot free her. Right? There would be a way to protect her from violation and protect people from sin, without having to free her. Good. Gufa. Now that you mentioned this important rule, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel, Kol Meshachrer Avdo Oved Ba'aseh Shneimar Leolam Bahem Ta'avodu. Let's analyze this more in depth. That Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shemuel, that anyone who frees his Canaanite slave violates an aseh. Right? You should take them as slaves forever. So this is a competition of nations, and so yes, you should subjugate them forever and don't let them go free. Hold on. Wait a second. We have this famous story of Rabbi Eliezer. That's Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenus, right? The great sage. And he came to Bet Knesset, and there's only 9 people. And you can't count an Eved. So he saw his Eved, and he freed him. Right there on the spot, he says, here, you're free. And now that he's free, he becomes a full Jew. So how could you say that you're not allowed to free a Jew? To free Eved Kanani, when Rabbi Eliezer, just to make a minyan, freed his own Eved Kanani. And so we answer mitzvah shaneh. Okay, if it's for mitzvah, then you're right. Then you can do it. If you need this Eved for whatever mitzvah, then you're allowed to free him. You just can't free him for no reason. Okay, good. Now we bring the full machloket. This pasuk, lamem ta'avodu, according to Ishmael, is optional. It means that when you go to war and conquer this other people, if you want, you can enslave them. You don't have to enslave them. If you did enslave them, you can set them free. Maybe it's even good to not have slavery. But Rabbi Akiva says you have to enslave them and you cannot let them go. So now we say, maybe Rabbi Eliezer was actually following Rabbi Ishmael. And that's why he freed his slave in order to make a minyan. Not because the mitzvah is different. In fact, if you follow Rabbi Akiva, and Shemuel does follow Rabbi Akiva, then there was no exceptions, right? So you don't have to, our previous conclusion from this contradiction was that, if he has a mitzvah, then you can override lo olam behem ta'avodu, this prohibition of freeing a slave. But maybe not. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer follows the lenient opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, and Rabbi Eliezer was actually be older than Rabbi Ishmael, right? But they follow the same opinion. And Shemuel would be following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, says you're not allowed to, and there would not be an exception for a mitzvah. So we answer La Sakadatech Tanya Behedya Rabbi Eliezer Omer Chova. No, you can't say that here because Rabbi Eliezer actually said explicitly that he follows Rabbi Akiva, that says you must enslave them and keep them as slaves. So when he freed his slave in order to make a minyan, obviously, even those who follow that prohibition and say you can't free your slave if it's for a mitzvah, then you can. Now more on the theme of freeing one slave, Rabbah says because of 3 things, homeowners become impoverished. The first one, because they let their slaves go. I mean, it could be true that if they let their slaves go, then they become impoverished if they have a plantation or something that's dependent on slave ownership. So they better get a new business model so that they won't go bankrupt. Okay, and they inspect their property on Shabbat. Even on Shabbat, although they're not working, they're going around the field and they're thinking about, this is growing well, this is not, this is going to need fertilizer. The third type of people that get impoverished is those who schedule their Shabbat meal during the time of the lecture in the Bet Midrash. Right, so they don't care about attending the study session in the Bet Midrash, and instead they make their time for the Shabbat meal at the same time. Damar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, Shete mishpachot hayu b'Yerushalayim, achat kaba seudata b'Shabbata, v'achat kaba seudata b'Erev Shabbat, u'shtehen ne'aykru. Rabbi Yochanan says there were two families in Yerushalayim, and they, even though they did opposite things, they both got punished. One made their Su'udah on Shabbat, and then the other one Erev Shabbat. But both of them were uprooted. So why? Well, the one that did it on Shabbat, they would have their big meal, let's say on Friday night, at the time of the lecture, right? Whereas other people would go eat and then come back, eat first, eat earlier, and then come back and listen to the lecture. These families, they didn't care. They made their Shabbat evening meal late. And then they missed the whole shiur. So that they're doing wrong. And the other is that they make their Su'udah on Erev Shabbat, on Friday afternoon. Before Shabbat, they go and have a big meal, a big mazah, and they get all full, and then they are disrespecting Shabbat like that. I don't know anybody that would do that, but I guess back then they did that. And so both of them are doing the wrong thing. So we bring this in just because we happen to talk about freeing slaves as a negative thing. It's hard to believe that people were saying that it's bad to free one's slaves. The whole thrust of the Torah regarding slavery is to move away more and more from slavery. But you can see that things take a long time to change, and the rabbis are writing within a Roman context in which legal slavery was a part of daily life. Amar Rabba Amar Rav, Hamakdish Abdo Yasa Leharut. Okay, so now Rav says, someone who makes his slave Hekdesh. Now, what does that mean when you make it hekdesh? A slave, you can't, it's not like an animal. An animal has two types of kedusha. You can make a kedusha taguf. If it's a kosher, unblemished animal, you make it into a sacrifice, and you have to give the actual animal to the Bet HaMikdash to take it and sacrifice it. An animal, you can also say, I'm donating its value, right? And in that case, you would either give the amount, the value, or sell it and give that amount. So over here, when a person says, I'm going to make my slave holy, consecrate my slave, then the slave goes free according to Rav. And this is interesting. Why would the slave go free? Well, first of all, the body of the slave certainly does not become kadosh. This is not a kosher sacrificial animal. You can't sacrifice a slave. And according to Rav, he doesn't mean it's his monetary value either, because then he would say, I'm paying the monetary value of the slave. He didn't say that. Rather, he said, I'm giving the slave, this slave is, I'm making kadosh this slave. And therefore, since it's a slave, we assume that what the owner means is, I'm going to turn this slave to be part of the Jewish nation, the holy nation. I am sanctifying the slave, not as a sacrifice and not as a donation, but sanctifying him by changing him over from being an Eved Kanani to a full Jew. So Rav says that's what it means. Now, it wouldn't mean the same if it was an animal, because an animal can't convert and be part of the holy nation, but a slave can, so that's what we assume he means. Okay, that is Rav's opinion. Now, Rav Yosef, that was Rav's opinion according to Rabbah. So Rabbah's interpretation of Rav. However, Rav Yosef Amar Rav Yosef said the name of Rav, Hamafkir Abdo Yasa Leharut. He doesn't say Hamakdish, he only says someone who renounces ownership of his slave, the slave goes free. So only if he says, I hereby renounce ownership, right? Then it goes free. Manda Amar Makdish Kol Sheken Mafkir. Now, according to Rabbah's, in the name of Rav, he would say, even if he would agree with both formulas, because even if you say Makdish, which is ambiguous, Makdish might mean that he's giving the value of it. So if he says that Makdish means I'm making him Kadosh and letting him go, then all the more so Mafkir, which is I'm letting him go, I'm renouncing ownership, for sure. That's even clearer language, and would agree that let's go. However, Rav Yosef, in the name of Rav, who says the mafkir language, he would say only if the owner says, I renounce ownership of the slave, then the slave goes free. But Makdish Maybe not. Makdish, maybe he means that I want to consecrate, I want to donate the value of the slave. The slave is not going free. I just want it on the market. The slave would go for $1,000. That just mean that I'm donating $1,000 according to it. That's according to Rav Yosef. Now we have a question. Sarich get shichrur or lo sarich? When someone renounces ownership of his slave, does he also have to give a get shichrur or not? We saw already before that this is machlok. Rabbi Yochanan said yes, and Shmuel said no. So now we're asking again. Tashema damar Rav Chiya bar Abba amar Rav Chiya bar Avin amar Rav echad ze ve'echad ze yasar lecharut v'serich get shichrur. So we have a statement in the name of Rav that both in this case where he consecrates a slave, this is following Rabba's statement of Rav, or when he says mafkir, which is both opinions in the name of Rav. So in any case that the slave goes free monetarily, he requires a get shichrur. Yes, you do have to, because you only let go the slave monetarily. I don't own the slave anymore, but the slave still doesn't have a full status of a Jew to marry a free Jewish woman. So yes, you have to say it. Okay, you have to give a get shichrur. Amar Rabbah. Now Rabbah, who said the original statement that makdish or mafkir, both of those formulations allow the slave to go free, he himself quotes an objection. Motvinan ashma'atin. We asked a question from a braita on this statement. Makdish nechasav ayu behen avadim. Enagiz bin ashen hosian lechairut. Someone says, I consecrate all of my property. So all of his property, everything that he has, will go and now belong to the Bet HaMikdash. Now, among his possessions, he had slaves. So what are they going to do with the slaves? So the treasurers who now take this the property, they cannot free the slaves because they don't actually own them, right? They own the value of it. And so they can't just free the slaves, but here's what they can do. They can, since they own the value, they can sell the value of the slaves to someone else, and then that buyer will actually own the slave as a slave, and then that buyer can emancipate the slave if they want. But the treasurer doesn't have their personal ownership of the slave as a slave, only over the monetary value of it. Now, already from this point, you can see that this baraita contradicts Rav, because Rav says that when someone may use his lines hamakdish and says, right, my slave is hekdesh, then he doesn't mean that it's actually hekdesh or even that the monetary value. What he means is I'm making my slave holy to be part of the holy nation. It means I'm freeing my slave. So Rav thinks that the word makdish means that he's becoming free. Whereas over here, the person is makdish, his property, within that is the slaves, and we don't say, oh, the slave goes free. We actually say the opposite, that the temple treasurers cannot free the slave. Instead, they own the monetary value, and so the best they could do is sell him. Same is true for the Rabbi Omer. Omer ani afu noten de me'atzmo v'yoseh mipnei shu k'mochro lo. Rabbi just adds that the slave himself can emancipate himself, because it's like he's buying his own freedom. That's fine. That's also permitted, right? But according to neither opinion of this baraita, does makdish mean that, oh, the slave is becoming kadosh, is becoming part of the holy nation? I'm thinking that maybe you could answer that since he's makdish all of his nechasav. So here you can't possibly say it means he wants everything. Wants his animals, his land, his car to be part of the holy nation. So it doesn't make sense for the other things. But the Gemara doesn't say that, but rather assumes that the slaves, if the slaves are kadosh, and the word kadosh according to Rav should mean that they go free and become part of Am Kadosh. But here this baraita only says that the temple owns its monetary value of the slaves. So how do we answer? And the answer is matnita karamit ale de Rav tanahu falig. What, you're bringing a baraita against Rav? Rav has the status of a Tana. Rav is a first generation Amora, but even and that it's in between. He spoke to. He was a student colleague with the Tanaim themselves, so he's already at the level that he's never quoted in a Braita. Maybe one time he is. But he has the status of a Tana. He could say, I don't agree with that Braita because he's such an early authority. Now, Tashema, Ach kol cherem vegomer me'adam elo avada v'shifchota v'kena'anim hacha b'may askinan de'amar lidmeh. We have a question from this pasuk. It's talking about cherem. Cherem is also another type of donation. And among the things in the pasuk, it says a person, which means you can make a cherem, you can give a donation of a person, meaning of a slave. And so this person doesn't mean they go free. It means that the person is donating the value of the slave. So how come over here you say it's donating the value of the slave? Why don't you say that they go free? That's what Rav says. Another contradiction to Rav. So the answer is, here in this Baraita, we're assuming a case where he said for its monetary value, making the monetary value of the slave hekdesh. In that case, if you specify monetary value, then certainly Rav would agree. And so that's the case it's talking about. Now that we have that answer, we go all the way back to the beginning. If that's true, then this Braita here that you're quoting, you don't have to say this answer that Rav is a Tana and is arguing. Why not say that Hamakdish Nechasav, and he said for its monetary value, which is kind of what I wanted to say. Hey, you have to assume because it says called Nechasav, so if he's saying everything, then obviously it means monetary value. But anyway, if you're making that Okimta for this Braita, why not make the same Okimta for this Braita and say Rav agrees? If you say this is for its, I'm giving these slaves the monetary value, then he only has to give monetary. But if not, then they go free. So, right, why don't you say both of these answers will be, but for both these, but I thought say it's monetary value. And we answer, wait a second. If he only donates the monetary value of the slaves, then all he has to do is he goes assesses them $1,000. Pay $1,000. The slave himself, his body, would not be transferred over, not even for a moment, to the treasurers, right? And now, the treasurers are not allowed to free them. The treasurers have to sell them. Right, the treasurers wouldn't even get the slaves in the first place. They would only get a monetary payment. And furthermore, I mean, it's the same question again and again, that other people will buy them, right? The treasurers sell to other people, and those people, the buyers, can then emancipate them. What do you mean others? If he in the first place, the donator only donated the monetary value. He's only giving money. He's not giving over slaves. Virtu, and furthermore, to be Omer ani afud noten dami asmo v'yoseh mipnei shehu kemochro lo v'lidmeh mai mipnei shehu kemochro lo. And the opinion of the Rabbi also wouldn't make sense that the slave can buy himself, right? Because it's like he's selling himself to himself. The treasurers are selling him to himself, and if the original person that only donated the monetary value, then it's it. He's only paying monetary value. The slave isn't going anywhere. So you can't say in that Baraita, the Baraita that Rabbah quotes, that's talking about when he says lidmeh. That has to be talking about a case where he says I'm donating everything, all the things, and yet. And that Braita, the slave does not go free. So there we have to say Tanahu upalig. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen ve'amen.